Hello everyone, my name is Alivia Brown and I am currently a fourth year undergraduate student at UCLA studying both anthropology and evolutionary medicine. And I like to think that I am the type of student who sort of enjoys everything, not only in the academic sense, but also in the life sense. In high school, I was definitely the student who got involved in all of the extracurricular activities. In college, I was someone who thought everything sounded interesting. So when it came down to it, to selecting like the right major and the major that you're committing to for the next 4 years, it felt like a lot of pressure, especially because, again, everything seemed really interesting and really appealing. And I felt like I was committing to not only a major, but also a career, which is not the reality of the situation at all. So if you have felt any of this pressure before, or you feel that pressure coming, this is definitely going to be the right lesson for you. And I'm going to share some of my tips in choosing the right major, but also how to take some of that pressure off. So without further ado, let's just get into it. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to be talking about is don't be afraid to experiment. Now, I think when you are entering college, there is this big assumption that gets made about needing to know exactly your life trajectory right then and there, when in reality, that is not the case at all. I'm a senior in college, and so many people in my life have no idea what their plans are, including myself. But when you enter college, you have the opportunity to take courses called general education courses, otherwise known as GE classes. You may have heard of them, you may have not, but to give you the gist of it, general education classes essentially are requirements that your school sets up with a bunch of classes that you have to take. So maybe your school has a language requirement. So you would be taking a general education class, which could be Spanish, it could be French, to fulfill this requirement. Then there's also, sometimes some schools have like lab requirements, so you'll be taking a lab class. Other things that you have to fulfill are diversity. So again, you'll be taking a diversity class. I think you probably get the idea at this point. But what you can do is actually be strategic with the kinds of classes you are using to fulfill those GE requirements. So when I went into college, I mentioned that I was undeclared and I experimented a lot. In my first quarter of college, I took 3 classes that fulfilled different GE requirements, and I used these to be like, okay, what do I like and what do I not like? And I was actually lucky enough to stumble into my major in that first quarter of college just by using and taking GEs that I found interesting and would be willing to major in. So for example, if you are the type of person that just loves science, maybe you could take a chemistry class, a biology class, and a math class your first quarter of college, and you can kind of get a feel for which of those you really enjoyed and then which one of those you maybe didn't enjoy as much. And then use that information and that opportunity to experiment to actually decide which thing, which major, which class you find most interesting and is transferable into selecting a major and, of course, selecting a career. Now, because you have this opportunity to experiment in college, I truly do think that it takes some of the pressure off, and I just want to remind you that you do not need to know exactly what you want to major in right when you enter college. You can experiment with classes all through college. I am in this position now where I have a few spaces available in my schedule, so I'm just taking things for fun, and I'm hoping that maybe it'll give me an idea of what I want a career in, even if it doesn't actually go on my degree. Okay, so my next tip, the next thing that we are going to be talking about is doing some research beforehand. Now, don't let this scare you. It's not a ton of work. In fact, it should be fun work because you're trying to find things that you like. But often I would say that a lot of people tend to lean one way or another when it comes to STEM or social science. I want you to ask yourself, do you have an underlying preference of science classes, or do you more like the humanities classes? And really quick, I want to note that you don't have to have a preference between them. I am someone who is majoring in a social science and then minoring in a STEM course, STEM classes. So do not put that pressure on yourself if you can't choose, that's okay. But for sake of explanation, let's just say you lean one way or another. Then I want you to do some research. What are some opportunities in the STEM fields that are up and coming right now? Or what are some opportunities that are up and coming in the social science areas? There's a lot of things that are always getting talked about and being like, okay, this is the next upcoming job. And if you can do a little bit of research in these spaces, and what I mean by that is the like social science space or like the STEM space, and kind of get an idea of which jobs are on the up and up, I think it's a really great way to actually work backwards. Be like, okay, well, this set of jobs are available to me. Now, what majors could I do to actually get me there? Now, the next thing that I want you guys to look into when it comes to selecting a career, selecting a major, is actually taking it a step further and doing some of the practical research that a lot of people don't do until they've already graduated college. And what I mean by practical research is looking into the reality of being a doctor, the reality of being a politician. Actually look into what that job looks like on a day-to-day basis. We live in this modern age now where people are so excited and willing to share everything that they do in their day. This is through blogs, this is through websites, even YouTube videos are available on these topics. If you want to know what it's actually like to be a doctor, do that research, because the last thing that you want to do is major in biochemistry, go to med school, actually get to be a doctor, and then realize that, I don't actually like this very much. And it happens to people all the time. So if you can take that proactive step and look into, okay, what does it actually look like to be a doctor? Are you up all hours of the night? Is it a 9-to-5 position? What kind of writing do I have to do? Some people really don't like writing. Is it a high pressure job? What kind of news do you have to deliver? These are all things that are extremely important when it comes to being a doctor, obviously in this example, but also just things that you should be considering when it comes to selecting a career. Now let's stray a little bit away from the doctor example and maybe shift over into a more social sciencey, Englishy example. A lot of people in these fields fulfill this like 9-to-5 job structure. Is that something you're okay with? Are you okay with sitting behind a desk? Do you have travel opportunities? All these practical questions are things that you should be looking up and seeing what the reality is of being a historian or a museum curator or whatever it is that stands out within these spaces. And then again, once you've done this research on what it's actually like to be a doctor or what it's actually like to be a museum curator, not sure why those are the examples that I've thought of, but bear with me, then you can work backwards. Like I've said before, you can work backwards and say, okay, this looks really interesting. What do I have to do to get there? And often if you find being a curator really interesting, maybe that's not exactly where you end up, but you might end up in a position that's related, all right? It's gonna be very similar steps to have gotten there. So again, I want you to take some of that pressure off and realize that everything that you are doing is a proactive step towards finding the right major and finding the right job. Now, really quickly, I do just wanna mention that this approach is not for everyone, and that's okay. Sometimes literally choosing a career is just too much of a forward thinking process that it just isn't for you, and that is 100% okay. If doing this in the reverse order suits your fancy a little bit more, definitely do that. This is just a strategy that has worked really well for me. Okay, now the final thing that I want to talk about is something that I have been alluding to for the entirety of this lesson, but that is just taking the pressure off. I think when you select a major, it feels like you are locking yourself into one space for the rest of your life, and that is just not the reality at all. You can be an English major and become a doctor, and you can be a philosophy major, become a mathematician, and then it goes the other way too. You could be a biochemistry major and become a historian. I have had several professors in college who have talked about how they did all these things during their college education and then ended up somewhere completely different. And as a student, as a high school student, as a college student, we don't really have those experiences yet to know that it's a possibility to actually switch gears completely. And the reality of the situation is, I'm telling you now, you can switch at any point and it is going to be okay. As a senior, I see people who have found exactly what it is they want to do, and it's so cool to have seen that journey all the way through. There's also people that get to the end of college and they decide, wow, I've learned so much about psychology, but actually I'm gonna go into business. And I don't want that to scare you at all. It's just, I want to prove this point that you are not locking yourself into one path for the rest of your life. Change is always possible and it is going to be okay. Lastly, these conversations are just not normalized enough. And if you have people in your life that are stressing around you, remind them that they are not committing to one thing for the rest of your life. And also maybe you can be the next person to start this conversation of taking some of the pressure off and just reminding people that it is always okay to switch your major or switch plans or just change course completely. Now, ultimately from this video, I want you guys to take away that selecting a major is not locking yourself into one career for the rest of your life. You have every opportunity to switch gears down the road. And also when it comes to actually selecting that major, there are a lot of different ways that you can do that in college. You can take an abundance of classes, take different GE classes. You could do an internship that's related to what you're interested in. There's a lot of ways to get your feet wet, so to speak, and then make sure you are actually choosing the right major that sounds interesting to you. You could also think about careers and do some backward thinking. So say, oh, I want to be a doctor. What are the steps I have to take to get there? And then overall, just remember, y'all can change paths at any time. So I think that is all I have to say for this lesson. I hope you guys are all having a fantastic week. All right, thank you. Bye.